Everybody talks about loyalty until it's time to prove it. This story right here, it's not just internet drama. It's not just another headline tied to NBA YoungBoy. This is about a moment where everything got tested, real loyalty, real pressure, and real consequences. Because when Ben 10 ended up fighting for his life, the question wasn't just what happened to him. The real question was, who was there when it mattered? And more importantly, who wasn't? Now here's where things take a turn. Because the name that keeps coming up isn't a random outsider. It's someone who carried the title of OG. Someone who was supposed to lead, supposed to stand solid, supposed to be the one people could rely on when things got dangerous. OG 3. But when the situation got critical, the story being told is that he disappeared. No clear explanation. No strong denial. Just one statement that left people even more confused than before. And when YoungBoy heard that, he didn't stay quiet. He went straight at it. And what happened next turned this into something way bigger than just one night. Before you can even understand why this situation exploded the way it did, you gotta understand the people involved and what they represent. Because this isn't just random names being thrown around online. This is a circle, a history, and a reputation that's been built over years. At the center of all of this is NBA YoungBoy. And whether you're a fan or not, one thing people agree on is this. He built his name on being real. Not polished, not media trained, not playing a character. What you see is what you get. That's the brand. That's the reason his fan base rides as hard as they do. Because in a culture where a lot of people perform authenticity, he built his career off living it, flaws and all. And when you build a reputation like that, the people around you matter just as much as the music. Because your circle becomes an extension of your identity. The way they move reflects on you, especially when things go left. That's where Ben 10 comes in. Ben 10 isn't just some background figure or somebody who popped up after the fame. He's been around. Day one type energy. The kind of person who was there before the spotlight got bright, before the money, before the industry attention. In environments like that, loyalty isn't something you say, it's something you prove over time. And from everything that's been seen publicly, Ben 10 carried that role. He wasn't just around for the wins, he was part of the foundation. Now that matters, because when something happens to someone like that, it hits different. This isn't just another incident. This is somebody who, in that circle, earned a certain level of trust and respect. And when that trust gets tested, everybody connected to it gets pulled into the spotlight. Then you have OG 3. Now the title OG isn't just a nickname you throw on yourself because it sounds good. In the culture, that word carries weight. It implies experience, leadership, someone who's been through enough situations to know how to move when things get complicated. It also means responsibility. When you're labeled as an OG, people expect you to be the one who stays solid when everybody else might panic. OG 3 had that position around the circle. Not just present, but seen as someone with authority, someone who understood the environment, someone who younger members could look to when things got serious. That's the image. That's the role. And everything is fine until a moment shows up that tests whether that image is real or just something that was being carried. Because at some point, there was an incident involving Ben 10, and this wasn't small. This wasn't something you brush off or exaggerate for clicks. This was serious enough that he ended up in the hospital in critical condition. The kind of situation where medical staff are actively trying to keep someone alive. That's not rumor-level drama. That's life or death reality. And whenever something like that happens, the timeline becomes everything. People start asking questions immediately. What led up to it? Who was there? What went wrong? And most importantly, how did the people around him respond in that moment? Because it's easy to look solid when nothing's happening. It's easy to claim loyalty when there's no pressure. But when things turn dangerous, when decisions have to be made fast, when staying could put you at risk, that's when people really show who they are. And that's exactly where this situation starts to shift. Because as details, real or rumored, started circulating, one question kept coming up over and over again. Where was OG 3? Not after the fact. Not later. In that moment. According to what started spreading across social media, and through people connected to that environment, OG3 was either present or close enough to be involved when everything went down. And instead of standing firm, instead of holding it down the way people expect from someone carrying that OG title, the story being told is that he left. Not stepped away to get help. Not moved strategically. Just gone. And that's the part that changed everything. Because in a situation like that, perception becomes reality fast. And once that narrative starts building, that someone abandoned their own in a life-threatening moment, it spreads quicker than anything else. Now here's the thing. At this stage, nothing had been fully confirmed publicly. No official breakdown. No detailed timeline from reliable sources. Just a growing narrative fueled by people talking, reposting, reacting. But in today's world, that's all it takes. Once enough people repeat the same version of events, it starts to feel like truth whether it's fully verified or not. And that pressure builds fast. Because now it's not just about what actually happened, it's about what people believe happened. And when your name is attached to that kind of narrative, especially in a culture where reputation means everything, staying silent isn't neutral. Silence starts to look like avoidance. Like you don't have an answer. Like maybe there's something you can't explain. So all eyes slowly shift toward OG3. Waiting, watching, expecting some kind of response that either shuts everything down or at least offers a different side of the story. Because if you were really there, if you really move the way people are saying you didn't, this is your moment to clear it up. This is where you step in and say, here's what actually happened. This is where you bring facts, details, witnesses, something solid. But that's not what happened. And at the same time, the situation isn't just sitting in the background. Because the bigger the conversation gets, the more it starts reaching the one person who is always going to have something to say about it. YoungBoy, now understand this. He's not just some distant figure hearing rumors from the outside. This is his circle, his people, his name connected to all of it. So when something like this starts building momentum, it's not just gossip to him, it's personal. And from everything people have seen over the years, he's not the type to let something like that slide quietly. Especially when it involves someone he's been close to, someone who's been part of his day one circle. So as the narrative grows, as the questions get louder, as the silence from OG3 starts to stand out more and more, the tension builds. Because now it's not just about what happened that night. It's about what happens next. Who speaks? Who stays quiet? And who's willing to stand on whatever truth they claim? And once that line gets crossed publicly, there's no taking it back. By the time the situation reached this point, the tension wasn't just building, it was ready to snap. The conversation had already spread beyond small circles and into a wider audience, where opinions form fast and stick even faster. And once a narrative like this gains traction, it doesn't just fade away on its own. Somebody has to address it. And that moment came. When NBA YoungBoy finally responded, there was no confusion, no coded language, no subtle hints. He didn't dance around it. He didn't soften the message. He went straight at OG3, directly, publicly, and with the kind of energy that made it clear, this wasn't speculation to him. This was something he believed. And that's what made it hit different. Because when someone at his level speaks on a situation like this, it changes everything. It takes the conversation from rumor to confrontation. From people are saying to now it's being said out loud. He called it exactly how he saw it. Accused OG3 of leaving Ben 10 in a moment where it mattered most. No room for interpretation. No space to pretend it was about anything else. And once that was out there, the situation officially crossed a line. Now, it wasn't just the internet talking. Now it was internal, publicly internal. And that's a dangerous place for any circle to be in. Because once something like that gets aired out in front of everyone, it forces a response. Not just from the person being accused, but from everyone watching. People start choosing sides, analyzing every word, breaking down every move like it's evidence in real time. And that's exactly what happened here. All attention shifted to OG3. Because now this wasn't just about whispers or secondhand stories. This was a direct call out from someone who knows the situation up close. So the expectation changed immediately. People weren't just hoping for a response. They were demanding one. And to be real, there were only a few ways he could have played it. He could have stayed completely silent, let things cool down, and handled it privately. Not the strongest move, but at least it doesn't add more fuel to the fire. He could have come out with a detailed explanation. Something clear, something specific, a timeline, an account, anything that directly addressed what he was being accused of. That would have at least given people something to evaluate. Or he could respond in a way that tries to shift the conversation entirely. And that's the route he took. When OG3 finally spoke, instead of addressing the accusation head-on, instead of saying this didn't happen or here's what really went down, he dropped a statement that sounded more like a quote than an explanation. Being a leader is not easy. That was it. No details. No dinaid. No clarification. Just a broad, philosophical line, because in moments like this, people aren't just listening to what you say. They're paying attention to what you don't say. And what OG3 didn't say stood out louder than anything he did. He didn't deny being there. He didn't deny leaving. He didn't offer a different version of events. He didn't explain his actions. And in a situation where the accusation is that serious, that kind of response doesn't calm anything down. It makes it worse. Way worse. Because now people aren't just questioning what happened. They're questioning why he didn't defend himself properly. And once that door opens, the interpretation starts running wild. Some people saw that statement as an attempt to sound composed, like he was trying to rise above the chaos. But a lot of people didn't read it that way at all. To them, it felt like deflection, like someone avoiding specifics, because they couldn't actually dispute them. And in environments where credibility is everything, that perception sticks hard. Because think about it. If someone publicly accuses you of abandoning your own in a life or death situation, and your response is something that doesn't even address the accusation directly, what does that look like? To a lot of people, it doesn't look like strength. It looks like avoidance. And that's exactly how the internet took it. The statement spread fast, but not in a positive way. It became something people repeated, quoted, even mocked. Not because it was powerful, but because it felt disconnected from the reality of what was being discussed. The gap between the accusation and the response was too wide. And that gap is where reputations start to fall apart. Meanwhile, NBA YoungBoy wasn't backing down. If anything, the response seemed to confirm his stance rather than challenge it. Because from his perspective, and from the perspective of people who already believe the story, OG3 had just failed to defend himself in the one moment where it mattered most. And that's when the situation shifted again. Because now it wasn't just about the original incident anymore. Now it was about credibility, about identity, about whether the image OG3 had built as an OG actually held up under pressure. And once it gets questioned publicly, it's hard to recover from. Because titles don't protect you in moments like this. They actually make it worse. The higher the position you claim, the higher the expectation when things go wrong. And if you don't meet that expectation, people don't just criticize the moment. They start reevaluating everything. Every time you spoke like a leader, every time you gave advice, every time you carried yourself like someone others should follow. All of that gets looked at differently now. And that's exactly what started happening. The conversation got bigger than just one incident. People began asking deeper questions. Not just what happened that night, but who is this person really? Was the leadership real? Or was it something that only existed when things were safe? Because pressure has a way of exposing things that normal situations don't. And once that exposure happens publicly, there's no controlling how people interpret it. At the same time, there's another layer to all of this that can't be ignored. Ben Tizedik. While all of this back and forth is happening online, while narratives are forming and reputations are being debated, he's the one who actually went through the situation. The one who ended up in the hospital. The one dealing with the real-life consequences. And that adds weight to everything. Because this isn't just talk. There's a real outcome behind it. And knowing that makes people react even stronger. Because now it's not just about perception. It's about what someone did or didn't do when another person's life was on the line. That's why the reaction was so intense. That's why the response from OG3 didn't land the way it might have in a different situation. And that's why NBA YoungBoy stepping in publicly carried so much impact. Because in that moment, he wasn't just speaking as an artist. He was speaking as someone drawing a line. And once that line is drawn in public, there's no going back to how things were before. At this point, everything had already been said, but at the same time, nothing felt resolved. Because situations like this don't just end with one statement or one response. They linger. They shift how people see each other. They change the energy inside a circle, sometimes permanently. And that's exactly where things stand now. Because when you strip away all the noise, all the commentary, all the reactions, what you're left with is something much simpler, but much heavier. A moment happened. A serious one. And in that moment, decisions were made. Now, everybody's living with how those decisions look from the outside. For NBA YoungBoy, the message was clear from the start. He wasn't interested in letting things slide or pretending nothing happened. From his perspective, this wasn't something you keep behind closed doors. This was something that needed to be addressed directly and publicly. And whether people agree with that approach or not, one thing is undeniable. It set a standard. It told everyone watching, everyone connected, everyone paying attention, that certain lines don't get crossed without consequences. That loyalty isn't just something you talk about when it's convenient. It's something that shows up when the situation gets uncomfortable or even dangerous. And once he made that stance public, it forced everything else into the open. Because now it wasn't just about what OG3 did or didn't do. It was about what that situation represented. The idea of being an OG. The idea of leadership. The idea of responsibility when other people are depending on you. All of that got put under a spotlight. And the reality is, titles don't mean anything if they don't hold up when pressure hits. Anybody can claim experience. Anybody can present themselves as someone who knows how to move. But when things actually go wrong, when there's real risk involved, that's when the difference shows. And in this case, the perception, right or wrong, is that OG3 didn't meet that moment. And perception, especially in a culture built on reputation, can be just as powerful as fact. Because once people decide how they see you, it's hard to change that. Even if more information comes out later. Even if there are details that weren't known at the time. The first impression in a situation like this sticks. And right now, that impression isn't in his favor. The response he gave didn't help either. That one line, being a leader is not easy. It didn't close the gap. It didn't answer questions. It didn't give people something solid to hold on to. Instead, it created more distance. Because in a moment where people were looking for clarity, they got something abstract. And abstract doesn't work when the situation itself is concrete. Someone ended up in the hospital. Someone was fighting for their life. Those are real outcomes. So when the response doesn't match that level of reality, it feels disconnected. And that disconnect is what people reacted to the most. Not just what was said, but what wasn't. Because silence on specifics leaves room for assumption. An assumption almost always leans negative when the stakes are this high. At the same time, there's another side to this that doesn't get talked about as much. The internal impact. Because outside of what the public sees, moments like this affect relationships behind the scenes in ways that don't always get posted online. Trust shifts. Conversations change. The way people move around each other isn't the same anymore. Because once doubt gets introduced into a circle, it doesn't just disappear. Even if people try to move forward, that memory stays there. That question stays there. What happens if it gets real again? And that's not something you can answer with words. That's something that only gets answered over time, through actions. But the challenge is, not every situation gives you a second chance to prove yourself. Some moments are one-time tests, and how you show up in that moment defines how people see you from that point forward. That's the weight of it. For Ben 10, this situation isn't about narratives or debates. It's about recovery. It's about dealing with what actually happened physically, mentally, emotionally. Because being in a life-threatening situation doesn't just end when you leave the hospital. There's an aftermath. And part of that aftermath is understanding who was there for you and who wasn't. That realization alone can change everything. And while the public focuses on the drama, on the back and forth, on the statements and reactions, that part stays real no matter what. Then there's the bigger picture. Because this situation didn't just stay contained within one circle. It became something people everywhere started talking about. Not because they know all the details, but because the core idea is relatable. Who really has your back when things go left? Who stays when it's risky? Who leaves when it's easier? That's not just a question for one group of people. That's a universal question. And that's why this hit the way it did. Because even if the names are specific, the situation isn't. Everybody watching can understand the principle behind it. And once that principle gets challenged publicly, people pay attention. They analyze it. They compare it to their own lives. They take sides based on what they believe loyalty should look like. And in that sense, this became bigger than just one incident. It became a reflection of values, of expectations, of what people think real actually means. For NBA YoungBoy, this moment fits into a pattern that people have seen before. He doesn't stay quiet when something crosses a line in his world. He addresses it directly, sometimes publicly. And whether that approach creates more conflict or more clarity depends on who you ask. But one thing it always does is make his position clear. There's no guessing where he stands. And in situations like this, that kind of clarity carries weight, because it forces everyone else to decide where they stand too. There's no neutral ground once everything is out in the open. People either agree with how it was handled or they don't. They either believe the accusations or they question them. But either way, the conversation doesn't just disappear. It stays active, it evolves, and it leaves a mark. So now the situation sits in that space. Not fully resolved, not fully understood, but definitely not ignored. OG3 is left dealing with how his response was received, with the way his image has shifted, with the reality that once something like this attaches to your name, it doesn't just fade overnight. Ben 10 is focused on something much more important, getting back to himself after going through something serious. And NBA YoungBoy keeps moving forward, the way he always does, making it clear through his actions where he stands. And everybody watching, they're still debating, still analyzing, still asking the same question that started all of this when it really mattered. What actually happened? And until there's a clear answer that everyone accepts, that question isn't going anywhere. Now here's the real question, and I want you to think about this before you scroll. In a situation like this, where the stakes are real and the consequences are even realer, what matters more to you? What people say or what people do when it counts? Because this whole situation involving NBA YoungBoy, Ben 10, and OG3 isn't just about one night. It's about standards. It's about expectations. And it's about how fast things can change when those expectations aren't met. So I want to hear from you. Do you think OG3 can come back from this? Do you think there's another side to the story that hasn't been told yet? Or do you feel like some moments speak for themselves, no matter what explanation comes later? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading everything. And if you rock with content that breaks things down without all the extra noise, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. Because stories like this, they don't end here. And we're going to keep covering every angle, every update, every detail. Stay locked in.